Today, when we open a refrigerator, we hardly think about it. Cold air hums softly, keeping fruit crisp, milk fresh, and leftovers safe for tomorrow. But for most of history, there was no such luxury. People lived through hot summers, long winters, and endless uncertainties. Yet they still found ways to keep food from spoiling. They built cellars underground, harvested ice in winter to use months later, salted fish and meat until it hardened, smoked food slowly over fires, dried fruits beneath the sun, and packed grains so carefully that they could last years. The story of how people kept food fresh before refrigerators is not only about survival, but also about creativity. It is about families planning ahead, entire villages working together, and small inventions that made the difference between hunger and security. These forgotten methods shaped daily life, determined who thrived and who struggled, and left behind traditions that linger even now. Before we begin, take a deep breath and let yourself settle. If you enjoy these quiet explorations into the forgotten corners of history, remember to leave a like and subscribe so you'll never miss another calm journey into the past. Now, let us step into the kitchens, fields, and workshops of long ago to discover how people kept their food fresh before refrigerators ever existed. Long before machines could hum with cold air, people turned to the earth itself for help. The ground, patient and steady, offered what they could not create on their own: coolness. Beneath the surface, away from the sun, temperatures stayed lower, more stable, less vulnerable to the heat of summer or the chill of winter. Across centuries and across lands, families dug into soil and rock to build underground cellars, hidden spaces where food could be kept safe. These cellars were not grand or elaborate, but for countless households, they were the difference between waste and survival. Imagine a village of centuries past. The houses above ground are small, built of wood or clay, their roof thatched with straw. In one corner of a yard there is a small opening, covered with a wooden door or stone slab. To a passerby it looks ordinary, but to the family who lives there it is a treasure. This is the entrance to their cellar. When the door is lifted, cool air rises, carrying with it the scent of earth and stored food. Steps, sometimes carved directly into the soil, lead downward into a chamber dug carefully by hand. Inside, the air is dim and still, the walls cool to the touch, the floor packed firm with clay or stone. Here food waits safely, protected from the burning sun and biting frost. The construction of these cellars varied with the land. In places where soil was soft, villagers dug deep pits, sometimes reinforced with wooden beams or stones to keep the walls from collapsing. In regions of rock, the work was harder, chisels and hammers echoing for days, as men carved small chambers that could endure for decades. Ventilation shafts were often added, allowing air to circulate slowly, keeping the space dry and preventing mold. Families lined the walls with shelves of wood or stone, placing jars, baskets, and sacks in neat rows. It was not luxury, but it was order, and order meant survival. Inside these cellars, the variety of food stored was impressive. Clay jars sealed with wax or cloth held grains, millet, barley, rice, or wheat. Baskets woven from reeds carried onions, garlic, and root vegetables, their skins tough enough to last for months in the cool dark. Jars of dried beans and peas sat stacked together, ready to be soaked and boiled when fresh food was scarce. In colder regions, salted meat hung from wooden hooks, its surface hardened but safe to eat after long cooking. Fruits, when dried or preserved in honey, were kept in small pots, their sweetness a rare delight during lean months. Every item had its place, every space was used carefully, because nothing could be wasted. Visiting a cellar was part of daily rhythm. At dawn, a family might send a child down the steps with a small basket, his bare feet padding across the packed floor, his eyes adjusting slowly to the dimness. He would fetch a sack of grain or a bundle of onions, carrying them carefully back up to his mother's kitchen. At midday, someone might return for a jar of pickled vegetables, the sharp scent filling the air as the lid was open. At night, father sometimes checked supplies, counting carefully how much food was left, planning for the days ahead. These trips into the earth were small but constant, reminders of how life depended on what lay below. The cellars also carried a certain quiet magic. On hot summer days when the air above shimmered and sweat ran down every back, stepping into the cellar was like stepping into another world. The cool air wrapped around you, your skin shivered slightly, and the weight of the sun seemed to vanish. Families cherished this relief, lingering a moment longer before climbing back up into the heat. Children found excuses to go below, sometimes sitting at the bottom of the steps just to enjoy the coolness, their laughter echoing faintly in the chamber. The cellar was not only storage but sanctuary. In winter, the cellars proved their worth again. Above ground, winds howled, snow piled high, frost crept across windows. But below, food remained safe, shielded by Earth's steady embrace. The cold outside might be deadly, but inside the cellar it was tempered, soft, manageable. Families carried their meals up carefully, grateful that months of preparation had given them security. Without the cellar, hunger might have prowled their homes. With it, they endured. The legacy of underground cellars stretched beyond survival. They shaped culture, teaching people patience, planning, and respect for the earth's gifts. A well-kept cellar was a mark of responsibility, proof that a family could endure hardship. Neglecting it meant waste, hunger, even shame. Over generations, knowledge of how to dig, line, and care for these spaces was passed down, becoming part of tradition. In some regions, entire communities shared larger cellars, gathering together to store grain or meat, trusting that cooperation would guard them all. These shared spaces became places of quiet conversation, of exchange, of communal survival. Even today, when refrigerators hum in nearly every home, echoes of these cellars remain. Farmers still dig cold storage for crops. Winemakers still carve underground rooms for barrels. Families in some rural regions still build earth-cooled chambers to keep food. The principle has never faded. The earth, steady and constant, provides coolness that machines only imitate. So when we think of life before refrigerators, we should not imagine chaos or waste. We should imagine careful families stepping into dim underground rooms, placing jars and baskets neatly, counting supplies, trusting the earth to keep them safe. We should imagine the cool air, the smell of soil and stored grain, the quiet patience of survival. These cellars were simple, but in their simplicity lay genius, the genius of using what was always there, beneath their feet, waiting to help them endure. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, picture yourself descending into such a cellar. The door creaks as you lift it. A soft draft of cool air greets you. You step down, your hand brushing against the earth-packed wall. The air grows still, the noise of the world above fades. Around you, baskets and jars line the walls, each one a promise of meals to come, of hunger kept at bay. You linger a moment in the calm, breathing deeply, before carrying food back up to your family. In that silence you understand. The earth itself was the first refrigerator, the patient guardian of survival, holding coolness in its depths for those who knew how to seek it. If underground cellars were the cool heart of food storage, then salt, smoke, and sun were its eternal guardians. Long before machines could freeze or chill, people turned to nature's simplest gifts to protect their harvests and catches. Each of these tools, grains of salt, curling smoke, and the heat of the sun, seemed ordinary, yet in the hands of resourceful families they became miracles. With them, food lasted not just days but weeks, sometimes months. Survival itself depended on these methods, and over centuries they became more than necessity. They became tradition, skill, and memory. Salt, the silent protector salt, was more than a flavor. To many it was as precious as silver, as valuable as grain, sometimes even more so. Its crystals had the power to keep food safe from rot, drawing moisture from meat or fish, halting the growth of decay. Families who had salt could face a long winter with hope. Those without it risked hunger. Imagine a small kitchen centuries ago. On a wooden table lies a fresh cut of meat, still warm from the morning's butchering. Beside it is a wooden bowl filled with coarse salt, its grains rough and pale. The family works carefully, rubbing the salt deep into every surface, packing it into cracks, pressing it firmly until the meat is coated thickly. The meat is then laid in a jar or hung in a cool room where the salt will work its quiet magic. Weeks later, when the meat is boiled or stewed, it is tough but safe, its flavor strong, its nourishment intact. Fish, too, was preserved in this way. Coastal villages relied on salt to turn fresh catches into stores for trade and survival. Fishermen returned from sea with nets heavy, their families waiting on shore with baskets of salt. Together they cleaned the fish, laid them in layers, packed each one with crystals, then stored them in barrels. The salt soaked deep, transforming the fish into something that could last far beyond its natural time. These barrels were rolled onto carts, carried inland, sold to villagers far from the shore. Salted fish became a taste of the sea for those who had never seen waves, a lifeline that tied coast and countryside together. Salt was not free. It had to be mined, boiled from brine, or carried from distant lands. Entire caravans traveled with sacks of it, guarded as carefully as treasure. Families often measured their salt with caution, using it sparingly, ensuring not a single grain was wasted. Children learned early that spilling salt was no small accident. It was losing a piece of survival. Smoke, the slow guardian. If salt was silence, smoke was patience. Families discovered that hanging meat or fish above a slow fire did more than cook it. The smoke, curling steadily upward, wrapped the food, drying it slowly, filling it with a protective layer of flavor and preservation. What began as necessity became art, for smoking not only saved food, but transformed it, creating tastes that lingered long after. Picture a small hut at the edge of a village, its roof darkened by years of smoke. Inside, wooden racks are hung with strips of meat, glistening faintly in the dim light. Beneath them a fire burns low, its flames hidden under layers of damp wood and leaves, chosen carefully to produce smoke rather than heat. The air is thick, carrying scents of oak, pine, or fruit wood. Day after day, week after week, the food hangs, absorbing the smoke, growing darker, firmer, safer. Families enter now and then to check the progress, turning the strips, adjusting the fire, their clothes carrying the scent of smoke long after they leave. Smoked fish, smoked sausages, smoked cheeses, each became a treasure. Travelers carried them on long roads, soldiers packed them in supplies, villagers saved them for the depths of winter. The smoke did more than protect, it created comfort. To eat smoked food was to taste not only nourishment, but the memory of fire, the warmth of a hearth, the care of those who had tended it patiently. Smoking was also communal. In some villages, entire smokehouses served many families, each adding their share, each taking turns tending the fires. Children played outside while parents worked within, the air around the smokehouse heavy with a scent that promised survival. In such places, smoke became not only method but memory, a symbol of patience and shared endurance. Sun, the ancient preserver, and then there was the sun, the oldest and simplest of all guardians. Its light and warmth, feared in summer for spoiling fresh food, could also be harnessed to preserve it. Fruits were sliced and laid on mats, their juices glistening as they dried under the sky. Vegetables were strung on ropes, left to shrivel slowly in open air. Meat was cut thin, salted lightly, then spread across wooden racks to dry into strips tough but long-lasting. Grain, too, was spread across courtyards, drying thoroughly before being stored, safe from mold. Imagine a village square on a bright day. Mats cover the ground, heavy with slices of apples, pears, or plums. Children run carefully between them, warned not to touch. The air is filled with sweetness, the fragrance of fruit carried on the breeze. Women sit nearby, chatting as they turn the slices to ensure even drying. Across another yard, strips of vegetables sway on strings, their colors fading, but their usefulness growing. A traveler passing through might smile at the sight, recognizing the timeless rhythm of food and sun. The sun was free, yet unpredictable. Storms could ruin days of drying. Rains could spoil an entire season's effort. Families watched the sky constantly, hurrying to gather their mats at the first sign of clouds. They learned patience, waiting for days of steady heat, trusting the sky to finish what they had begun. When the food was finally dry, it was stored carefully in jars or bags, its weight light but its value heavy. In the depths of winter, a handful of dried fruit was sweetness reborn, a reminder of summer's abundance. Nature's partnerships, salt, smoke, and sun, were more than tools. They were companions. Each had its strengths, each its limits, but together they created balance. Salt worked in cellars, smoke lingered in huts, sun spread across courtyards. Families combined them, salting fish before drying it in the sun, smoking meat after rubbing it with salt, drying fruit before storing it in cool underground chambers. Generations refined these methods, passing knowledge from parent to child, neighbor to neighbor, until they became second nature. These methods shaped not only survival, but taste, culture, and identity. Regions grew known for their salted fish, their smoked meats, their dried fruits. Recipes emerged, traditions formed, flavors carried memories. Even when refrigerators arrived centuries later, people continued to salt, smoke, and dry, not because they had to, but because the taste and memory were too valuable to lose. So when we think of life before refrigerators, we should not imagine only hardship. We should imagine the quiet scrape of salt across meat, the steady curl of smoke rising in a hut, the warm glow of fruit drying under a summer sky. We should remember the patience of families, the wisdom of generations, the partnership between people and nature. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, picture yourself in one of those villages. The air smells faintly of smoke. The ground is warm beneath your feet. The sun glows golden across rows of drying fruit. Beside you, barrels of salted fish rest, heavy with promise. Around you, people work calmly, their movements steady, their voices soft. Above it all, the sky stretches wide, eternal, watching as life and nature weave together in quiet cooperation. These are the whispers of salt, smoke, and sun, nature's guardians of survival, protecting families long before machines ever hummed with cold. When the first sharp winds of winter swept across lakes and rivers, and the water's surface hardened into glassy ice, some saw only the coming of hardship. But for others, winter's cold was an opportunity. These were the ice harvesters, men who ventured onto frozen waters, saws and chisels in hand, to cut and collect nature's most fragile treasure. With every block of ice they lifted, they were not thinking only of the present season, but of the future, of hot summer days when people would thirst for coolness, when food would risk spoiling, when the memory of winter would save them all. The work of harvesting, imagine a frozen lake in the deep of winter. The surface stretches far, covered in snow, but beneath the white lies a sheet of solid ice. The harvesters step carefully onto it, bundled in heavy clothes, their breath clouds in the freezing air. They carry saws with long teeth, iron chisels, wooden poles, and ropes. The snow is brushed away to reveal the clear ice beneath. The first cuts are made, long straight lines carved into the frozen surface, the sound of metal biting into ice echoing across the silent lake. Slowly squares are shaped, neat and measured, each one heavy enough to require several men to lift. The process is exhausting. Men bend low, their hands stiff with cold, their backs aching from sawing. Water seeps up as blocks loosen, freezing quickly around boots. Yet the harvest continues, block after block, as if each were a jewel. Some men push the loosened ice with poles, guiding it toward channels carved in the surface. Others hook ropes around the blocks, hauling them toward the shore. The ice groans and cracks beneath the work, a sound both frightening and familiar. For harvesters, it is the rhythm of their season. On shore, more men wait with sleds and carts. Horses stamp their hooves, steam rising from their bodies as they pull heavy loads of ice across snowy ground. Each block is stacked carefully, layer upon layer, straw packed between to keep them from freezing together. Entire wagons creak under the weight, rolling slowly toward ice houses where the real work of preservation begins. Ice houses, cold storage of the past. Harvested ice could not be left exposed. It would melt away with the first warmth of spring. Instead, communities built ice houses, deep pits dug into the earth, stone or brick chambers insulated with straw, sometimes even entire buildings designed solely to keep cold locked inside. These houses were dark and damp, their walls thick, their air heavy with chill. Workers stacked the ice inside, block after block, covering them with sawdust or straw to slow melting. When the doors were sealed, the house became a vault, a silent treasure chest holding the winter itself in the heat of summer. When fields shimmered with heat and food risked spoiling, families returned to these stores. A block of ice would be carried out, chipping off smaller pieces to cool milk, to preserve meat, to chill drinks. For those who lived near ice houses, the relief was profound. A sip of cool water on a blazing afternoon, a piece of meat that had lasted weeks longer than it should have. These were luxuries created by the patient labor of winter harvests. The value of ice became a trade of its own. In some regions, merchants carried it from cold mountains to warmer towns, wrapped in straw and packed into carts. Caravans rattled across dusty roads in the heat, their precious cargo melting bit by bit, yet enough surviving to fetch high prices in markets. Wealthier families paid dearly for ice, not only for preservation, but for comfort. To serve guests with chilled drinks in summer was a sign of status, proof that you could command even winter's cold in the heart of heat. But ice was not only for the rich. In villages, the harvest was shared, blocks divided among families, stored carefully in smaller pits. Children marveled at the glistening treasure, pressing their hands against its cold surface, giggling at the sting. For them it was magic, the very essence of winter captured and held safe until summer. The harshness of labor. Yet for the harvesters themselves, the work was anything but magical. Days began before sunrise, when the air was sharpest, the lake surface firmest. The men worked in bitter cold, their clothes stiff with frost, their fingers numb even beneath layers of cloth. They risked falls through thin ice, injuries from saws, exhaustion from endless lifting. Many returned home with faces raw from wind, bodies trembling from fatigue, boots soaked from icy water. And still they rose the next day to continue, because the survival of their communities depended on it. The work was dangerous but also communal. Dozens of men labored together, their voices shouting across frozen fields, their laughter rising despite the cold, their strength shared as they lifted block after block. Families supported them, bringing warm broth to the shore, mending clothes, tending horses. The harvest was not the task of individuals, but of entire communities. The survival of one was tied to the survival of all. The memory of ice, even centuries later, long after refrigerators replaced ice houses, the memory of ice harvests lingers. Old buildings with thick walls still stand in some villages, silent reminders of winters when men hauled cold from frozen lakes. Some traditions survive too. Families still cut small amounts of ice for festivals. Communities still tell stories of winters when the harvest saved them from hunger. And in every glass of chilled water, in every preserved meal, there is an echo of those harvesters who captured winter with their hands. The poetry of preservation. There is something poetic in the image of ice harvesters. To see them bent against the wind, cutting deep into frozen lakes, lifting blocks that gleamed like crystal. It was as if they were gathering pieces of time itself. They captured what was fleeting and made it last. They gave shape to cold, carried it into the warmth, and let it soften the hardships of summer. Their labor reminds us that even the harshest season carries gifts, if only one knows how to use them. So when we think of life before refrigerators, we should imagine not only cellars and salted food, but also men on frozen lakes, their saws biting into ice, their sleds creaking under loads of cold. We should imagine the silence of ice houses, the chill air inside, even when outside burned with heat. We should imagine the joy of a sip of cold water on a blazing day, made possible by the endurance of winter's harvest. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, picture yourself standing on a frozen lake. The air is sharp, the sky pale with winter sun. Men around you saw steadily, their breath rising in clouds, their tools ringing against ice. A block loosens, slides free, and with a cheer it is hauled to shore. Horses stamp, sleds creak, and slowly the harvest moves toward safety. You reach down, touch the block, it stings your skin, clear as glass, heavy as stone. In that moment you understand. Winter has been captured, and its coolness will carry life into summer. Before the hum of machines, before cool air flowed from metal doors, people turned to the simplest yet most ingenious material, clay. The earth, shaped by human hands and hardened by fire, became a vessel of survival. In almost every corner of the world, from small villages to great cities, clay jars and earthen pots stood as silent guardians of food. They were not beautiful in the way gold or silver might dazzle, though some were decorated with care. Instead, their beauty was in their purpose, in their ability to hold life safe. Grains, water, oil, milk, even pickled vegetables, all could be protected within clay, away from air, light, and time. These vessels were the quiet refrigerators of their age. Imagine walking into a household of centuries past. The house is modest, its floor hard-packed earth, its roof low and thatched. In one corner stands a cluster of large jars, their bellies round, their mouths sealed with wax or cloth, some covered with flat stones. To the family who lives here, these jars are treasure chests. They are filled not with jewels, but with survival. Wheat that will become bread, millet that will fill bowls, beans that will thicken stews. Each jar holds months of planning, each one guarded carefully, because a single careless spill or crack could mean hunger. Clay had a magic of its own. Its porous nature allowed a subtle exchange with air, keeping contents cooler, drier, and safer than if they were left in open baskets. When water was poured into clay jars, the slow evaporation through the walls cooled it, giving families a refreshing drink even on the hottest days. When grains were sealed inside, the jars kept out pests and moisture, protecting the harvest long after fields had turned bare. A jar placed carefully in a cool corner could hold food for an entire season, buying families time against uncertainty. To prepare food for storage was itself a ritual of patience. After harvest, grain was dried carefully, spread across courtyards in the sun, raked and turned until every kernel was free of moisture. Only then was it poured into the waiting jars, the sound of falling grain like rain against clay. Families sealed the mouths with cloth or leaves, tied tightly with rope, then covered them with clay or wax. Some even buried their jars partially in the earth to steady the temperature further, creating an early form of insulation. Each action was deliberate, born of generations of trial and memory. Liquids, too, found protection in clay. Oil was poured into narrow-necked jars, its surface covered with a thin layer of wax or cloth to shield it from dust and insects. Milk was placed in smaller pots, often set in shallow pits or cool water to prolong its freshness. Even wine and vinegar were stored this way, their sharp scents lingering when lids were lifted. The clay not only preserved but also carried flavor, giving each household storage its own subtle character. Pickling and fermenting also belonged to the world of jars. Vegetables were layered with salt or brine, pressed down beneath heavy stones, sealed tight to keep air away. Days and weeks passed, and inside the darkness of clay, quiet transformations took place. What had been fresh and fragile became sturdy and lasting, its flavor sharp, its nourishment intact. To open a jar in midwinter when fields lay frozen was to taste summer again, a memory preserved in brine. Jars were not only practical, but also personal. Families marked them with scratches or painted designs, so that one could tell whose grain was whose, which jar held beans, which held oil. Some were plain, rough to the touch, made quickly for need. Others bore careful patterns, swirls of color, signs of pride in craftsmanship. In markets, jars themselves were sold as goods, their makers known for skill as much as farmers for grain. Entire economies rested on clay as much as on what it carried, for without jars, food could not endure. The presence of jars shaped the rhythm of homes. Each morning someone lifted a lid, scooped a measure of grain, and carried it to the hearth. Each evening someone checked supplies, counting quietly how much was left, how long it would last. Children learned early to respect the jars, to tread carefully near them, to never waste what they held. A broken jar was not just pottery lost. It was food lost, security lost, sometimes even life lost. This respect bound families to the vessels as though they were living guardians. Even travel relied on clay. Smaller jars were carried on carts or animals, filled with dried goods or liquids, sealed tightly against the bumps and jolts of the road. A caravan might carry hundreds, their clinking muted by straw, their weight steady and constant. Along rivers, jars floated in boats, their contents as valuable as any coin. Traders guarded them fiercely, for a single jar might mean a family's survival in the place it reached. Clay's story is one of ingenuity born from necessity. From the earth, people shaped vessels that gave them command over time itself. Where food might spoil in days, jars stretched it to weeks or months. Where water might grow warm and stale, jars cooled it and kept it clean. Where harvests might vanish with weather, jars preserved them until the next. They were not inventions of kings, but of households, created by countless ordinary hands. And though centuries have passed, the wisdom of clay remains. In some rural regions, clay jars are still used to keep water cool, to pickle vegetables, to store grains. Their quiet efficiency still rivals modern tools, proof that simplicity can endure. To hold such a jar, to feel its rough surface, to hear the sound of grain shifting inside, is to touch a chain of memory stretching back through centuries. Unbroken, UNFORGOTTE, so when we think of life before refrigerators, let us imagine not chaos, but order. A corner of a humble home, lined with jars that breathe quietly through their walls. The air is cool, the smell faintly earthy, the silence steady. Within those jars lies life itself, preserved by patience, protected by earth, waiting to nourish those who cared enough to prepare. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, picture yourself in that home. You lift a lid from a jar, scoop grain with a wooden ladle, and listen to it pour into a bowl with a sound like soft rain. You touch the clay, cool against your hand, its surface marked by lines from the potter's fingers. Around you are rows of jars, each one holding not only food but hope. And you understand, in that quiet moment, why clay was trusted for centuries, because the earth itself had been shaped into a keeper of life. Long before refrigeration, people discovered that time itself could be a tool, not an enemy. Left alone, food spoiled quickly. Milk soured, vegetables wilted, fish rotted, and meat decayed. But with patience, care, and knowledge passed through generations, families learned how to turn natural change into preservation. Pickling and fermenting were not just methods of saving food, they were acts of transformation. Ordinary vegetables became sharp, tangy treasures. Milk became stronger, longer-lasting nourishment. Fish and grains took on new flavors, new strengths. The process was slow, often invisible, but it carried with it the taste of survival and the whisper of tradition in villages across the world. Families gathered after harvest to prepare food for the months ahead. Fields yielded cucumbers, cabbages, turnips, carrots, and countless other vegetables. Instead of leaving them to spoil, they were cut, layered, and submerged in brine-salted water that seemed ordinary but carried powerful secrets. Heavy stones were placed on top to press them down, to keep them submerged, to ensure that air could not touch them. Over time, bubbles rose to the surface, faint hisses and pops escaping as the liquid came alive. Families watched with quiet satisfaction, knowing that this gentle fermenting was nature's way of protecting their harvest. Days became weeks, and when the jars were opened, the vegetables were no longer soft or spoiled. They were sharp, tangy, bursting with flavor, and most importantly, safe to eat. Pickling became more than preservation, it became taste itself. Entire cuisines grew around the flavors born from brine. A piece of bread eaten with pickled cabbage was not only food, but also memory of hands that prepared it, of patience that waited through weeks, of wisdom that turned fragility into strength. Children grew up with the sharp bite of pickled vegetables on their tongues, their palates shaped by the flavors of survival. Soldiers carried jars of pickled roots into campaigns. Travelers packed them for long roads. Villagers relied on them when snow buried their fields. The tang of vinegar or salt became a comfort, a reminder that even in winter, the garden still lived. Fermenting took this further. Where pickling used salt and brine, fermenting relied on the invisible work of time and air, of natural processes hidden from sight. Grains, soaked and warmed, transformed slowly, their sugars shifting, their texture softening. Milk left in clay pots thickened, soured, and changed into something richer, more lasting, more sustaining. Families did not understand the science as we know it today, but they understood the results. They knew that careful fermenting could carry them through harsh months, that it could turn small harvests into months of nourishment. The tools were simple, but their power lay in patience. Clay jars lined with leaves, wooden barrels sealed with wax, baskets wrapped in cloth, all became vessels of transformation. Inside, food shifted quietly, safe from the dangers of open air. The waiting was long, but waiting was part of life. Farmers waited for rains. Mothers waited for children to grow. Families waited for seasons to change. To wait for food to ferment was no different. It was simply another rhythm in the long song of survival. Pickling and fermenting also brought communities together. Families often prepared food in large batches, gathering neighbors to help cut vegetables, to salt them, to pack them into jars. Laughter echoed across courtyards. Children ran about carrying small baskets. Elders offered advice about brine strength or storage. In some places, entire villages shared pickling pits or fermenting jars, each family contributing and benefiting. These moments were not only about food, but also about unity, about the bond formed when survival depended on cooperation. Seasons gave flavor their meaning. In summer, the sharp tang of pickled vegetables reminded families to save some for colder days. In winter, when fresh harvests were gone, a bowl of fermented cabbage or turnip brought warmth and energy, a burst of life in the cold silence. In spring, as new crops sprouted, the jars were emptied and cleaned, ready for the cycle to begin again. Life turned with the seasons, and pickling and fermenting turned with it, tying families to rhythms larger than themselves. Travelers carried these foods across mountains and deserts, their flavors spreading from one land to another. In bustling markets, traders offered jars of pickled roots or fermented drinks, their scents sharp and unfamiliar to some, but quickly adopted by many. Over time, these flavors became identity, linking communities not just through trade, but through taste. What began as necessity became culture, a way of remembering who they were and how they endured. Even now, when refrigerators stand in every kitchen, the memory of these methods remains. People still pickle, still ferment, not only to preserve but to connect with the past. The sharp bite of a pickle, the tang of fermented vegetables, the richness of aged dairy, these flavors carry with them the echo of centuries, of hands that worked without machines, of families who trusted time to be their allied. So when we think of life before refrigeration, let us not imagine only bland or spoiled food. Let us imagine jars lined neatly in corners, their brine bubbling softly, their scents strong and alive. Let us imagine families gathering to share sharp, tangy meals, their laughter rising above the taste of patience. Let us remember that food was not only preserved but transformed. That time itself was turned from enemy into friend. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, picture yourself lifting the lid of a clay jar. The air is filled with the sharp, earthy scent of pickled vegetables. You take a piece, its surface glistening, its flavor alive, and you bite slowly. Around you, family gathers, bowls filled, the cold of winter soft by the taste of time itself. You smile because you understand that patience has a flavor, and that flavor is survival. In a world without refrigeration, fruit was one of nature's most fleeting gifts. Sweet in summer, abundant in orchards and fields, but quick to spoil, quick to wither, and quick to vanish with the changing season. Families looked at baskets, heavy with apples, plums, figs, grapes, pears, or apricots, and knew that without cleverness, most of this bounty would be lost within days. And so, over centuries, they turned to one of the simplest but most remarkable methods of preservation, drying. With patience, care, and the steady help of the sun and wind, they transformed fragile, juicy fruits into treasures that could last for months, even years. This practice was not merely a convenience. It was survival. It was also joy, for the sweetness of dried fruit carried with it the memory of warm orchards, even in the dead of winter. Picture a village at harvest time. Branches bend under the weight of ripened fruit. Children climb trees to pluck the higher branches. Women gather the fallen ones in baskets, and men carry the loads home on carts. The air is thick with fragrance, sweet, heavy, and alive. Families know they cannot eat it all before it spoils. Fresh fruit was delicious, but its softness made it vulnerable. And so preparations begin. Courtyards fill with activity. Wooden racks are laid out, woven mats unrolled, ropes stretched between posts. Knives flash in the sunlight as hands slice apples into thin rings, plums in halves, grapes pulled gently from their stems. Piece by piece, the fruit is spread out beneath the sky, left to the patient work of the elements. The drying process was a slow dance with nature. During the day, the sun warmed the slices, coaxing their juices out. At night, cool winds swept across courtyards and rooftops, carrying away the lingering moisture. Families guarded their drying fruits carefully. A sudden rainstorm could undo days of work, soaking the slices until they turned soft and spoiled. Birds and insects, too, were constant visitors drawn by the irresistible sweetness. Women waved claws, children clapped their hands, fathers built simple covers of cloth or straw to shield the precious harvest. Patience was demanded, but patience rewarded. After days or weeks, depending on the fruit and the climate, the slices grew darker, lighter, leathery to the touch. They had lost their fragility and gained resilience. What once spoiled within days could now last through seasons. The storage of dried fruits was an art of its own. Families placed them in clay jars, wooden boxes, or cloth sacks. To keep them safe from damp, they layered the jars with straw or leaves, sometimes sprinkling them lightly with ash or salt to deter pests. Some were sealed with wax or covered tightly with leather lids. Once packed, they were set in cool, dark corners of homes or cellars. The work was meticulous, but the reward was extraordinary. On a cold winter night, when snow covered the earth and orchards stood bare, a handful of dried figs or raisins could feel like a piece of summer reborn. Children cherished them as rare sweets, savoring each bite, while adults used them to enrich bread, stews, or PORRIDGES. Beyond survival, dried fruits carried comfort and memory. They were used as gifts, wrapped carefully, and shared between families. Travelers carried them in pouches, chewing on them for energy during long journeys across roads and mountains. Soldiers packed them in their supplies, their sweetness lifting spirits during bleak campaigns. Merchants recognized their value quickly, carrying dried fruit across markets, trading figs from one land for raisins from another, spreading not only nourishment but also culture. In many ways, dried fruits became the first portable sweets, humble but powerful reminders that nature's gifts could be stretched across time. The process was not always the same. Some families dried fruit under direct sun, spreading them across rooftops or courtyards. Others preferred shaded drying, where wind rather than sun did the work, producing fruits of softer flavor. In colder regions, fires were built low. Their smoke used to dry slices gently over days, filling the air with both sweetness and the faint scent of wood. Grapes, in particular, became raisins through careful drying, sometimes left hanging in bunches beneath eaves or spread on stones warmed by sun. Each fruit had its own rhythm, its own secrets, its own patience. Generations of families perfected these rhythms, passing them down as knowledge as essential as sowing seeds or baking bread. Dried fruits were more than food. They were symbols of foresight. A family with jars of raisins and apples stored away was a family prepared. A household with baskets of dried pears was a household that could face winter without fear. These stores gave parents peace of mind, children small joys, and entire communities a sense of security. Even when harvests failed the following year, dried fruits from the year before might carry families through hardship. In this way, drying was not only preservation but protection, a shield against uncertainty, written in sweetness. The memory of summer lingered in every bite. Imagine sitting in a snow-covered home, the wind rattling against the roof, smoke from the hearth filling the air with warmth. A jar is opened, and inside lie shriveled slices of apple, their surface wrinkled but their scent rich. A child takes one, chews slowly, and tastes not the cold silence of winter, but the golden warmth of summer fields. That simple act, that sweetness in the depth of hardship, was a miracle born of patience and care. Merchants and travelers carried these miracles far. Along trade routes, sacks of dried figs, dates, or apricots moved from one land to another. In busy markets, dried fruits hung in clusters, tempting buyers with their rich colors. Coins clinked, hands exchanged goods, and the sweetness of one valley found its way to another. Dried fruits became a quiet thread in the great tapestry of commerce, tying people together through simple, lasting nourishment. Even in times of celebration, dried fruits had a place. Festivals, weddings, and gatherings often featured bowls of raisins or figs, shared generously among guests. They were tokens of abundance, signs of hospitality, gifts of care. In poor homes, a handful of dried plums might be saved for special days, brought out as a reminder that even in modesty, joy could be found. Centuries later, when refrigeration arrived, drying did not vanish. Even now, families still dry apples in slices, still spread grapes beneath the sun, still fill jars with fruits that carry memory. The taste of dried fruit remains beloved, not because it is needed for survival anymore, but because it carries history in its flavor. Each bite reminds us of the patience of ancestors, of orchards heavy with fruit, of the wisdom to preserve sweetness against the cold dot. So when we imagine life before refrigerators, we should picture rooftops and courtyards covered in slices glistening under the sun. We should imagine families carefully gathering them each evening, watching the sky anxiously for storms, protecting them like treasure. We should imagine jars filled with dried figs, raisins, or apples, waiting silently in the corners of homes, their sweetness asleep but ready to wake at any time. We should imagine the joy of tasting one on a frozen night, the memory of summer carried on the tongue dot as you let your thoughts drift tonight. Picture yourself in a village courtyard at harvest. The air is warm, the scent of fruit fills your nose, and before you lies a sea of slices spread across mats. Children run, their laughter ringing, while adults work steadily, turning the fruit, guarding it from birds. The sun shines above, patient and endless. Slowly the fruit shrinks, darkens, strengthens. You reach down, pick up a piece, and taste it. Sweetness floods your mouth, and you understand why this simple act of drying was more than survival. It was the art of carrying summer into every season of life. Before machines could create cold at the push of a button, people turned to water-steady, patient, and eternal as their ally in the battle against heat and spoilage. Wells dug deep into the earth, springs bubbling fresh from stone, rivers winding through valleys all offered not only life to drink, but also coolness that could protect fragile food. Families, farmers, merchants, and travelers alike learned countless ways to use water as a natural refrigerator. These methods may seem simple to us now, but for centuries they were nothing less than ingenious survival. Imagine a well in the heart of a village. Its mouth is framed with stone, its rope worn smooth by countless hands, its bucket wet from constant use. By day, women gather here to draw water, their voices rising as they laugh and talk, children darting around them with clay cups ready to be filled. But beyond quenching thirst, this well holds another secret. Lowered deep into its shaft, tied carefully to ropes, jars of milk, baskets of vegetables, or sacks of butter rest suspended just above the water's surface. Down there, where sunlight cannot reach, the air is cool, damp, and steady. Each day the food is lowered, each night it is pulled back up, still fresh, still safe, still untouched by the heat above. To the families who practiced this ritual, the well was not only a source of water, but also a guardian of their meals. Springs, too, became nature's gift. In rocky valleys where water gushed endlessly from hidden veins in the earth, families built small huts or stone houses around the bubbling streams. Within these shelters, clay jars were set in shallow pools, their contents cooled by the constant trickle of cold water. The steady flow washed over them, carrying away warmth, preserving what lay within. These spring houses were quiet sanctuaries, places where the hum of insects mixed with the murmur of water, where children splashed their hands, and where mothers checked jars of milk or butter, nodding with satisfaction at how well they lasted. The water never tired, never stopped, always guarding the fragile food entrusted to it. Along riversides, families created their own clever tricks. Baskets woven from reeds were filled with vegetables or bottles and lowered into the current, weighted with stones so they would not drift away. The flowing water kept them cool, while the constant motion discouraged spoilage. Travelers, too, relied on rivers, tucking their food into leather sacks and dipping them into streams at night, letting the cold current protect them until morning. To camp beside a river was not only to rest, but also to find a refrigerator spread out beneath the stars, even in households far from large rivers. Clever minds found ways to mimic the cooling power of water. Clay jars were soaked and placed in breezy courtyards, their porous walls sweating moisture that evaporated into the air, chilling the contents inside. This principle, though simple, astonished those who used it. Milk stayed sweet longer. Water remained cool through blazing afternoons. Vegetables held their crispness. It was proof that people did not need machines to think like engineers. They only needed patience, observation, and trust in the quiet gifts of nature. These water-based methods shaped the rhythms of daily life. Each morning, someone was tasked with checking the jars in the well, ensuring they were tied securely, that no rope had frayed, that nothing had fallen into the dark water below. Children fetched baskets from streams, giggling as they splashed their legs, their laughter mixing with the rush of water. Farmers returning from fields paused at springs, taking slow drinks before retrieving jars of food that had been cooling in the shallow pools. Entire families relied on these rituals, so ingrained that they became second nature, as natural as breathing. The effect of water cooling was profound in summer. Imagine a day when the sun blazed, the earth cracked with heat, and sweat dripped endlessly from brows. Above ground, milk would curdle within hours. Vegetables wilt before they could be eaten. But thanks to wells and springs, families still placed bowls of cool milk on their tables, still cooked with fresh vegetables, still found relief in chilled water. This difference was not luxury. It was survival. Without these methods, hunger and waste would creep closer. With them, even the hottest months could be endured with dignity. Communities often worked together to protect and expand these water-based methods. Wells were dug by entire villages, with men lowering themselves into shafts, chiseling through stone, hauling buckets of dirt until clean water was reached. Springs were carefully diverted into channels, lined with stones to strengthen them, shaded by roofs to keep them cooler. These efforts required unity, and the results benefited all. The coolness of water was not something that could be hoarded. It was shared, flowing freely, touching every family. Merchants, too, relied on water as they traveled. Along caravan routes, stopping at rivers was as essential as resting. They cooled their goods in the currents, replenished their stocks of fresh water, and planned journeys carefully around access to springs and wells. Traders who carried perishable items like milk, cheese, or fresh herbs depended entirely on water's cooling power. Without it, their goods would spoil, their profits vanish. And so rivers and springs became not only lifelines for villages, but arteries of commerce, shaping where roads were built, where markets formed, where people settled. The legacy of these methods stretches far into the present. Even now, in rural communities, clay jars cooled by evaporation and spring houses built over streams are still used. Farmers still lower milk into wells, travelers still dip food into streams, children still splash their hands in springs that once cooled the meals of their ancestors. The wisdom has never vanished. It has simply been overshadowed by machines. But in quiet corners of the world, the cool guardianship of water continues, unchanged, patient, eternal dot. So when we think of life before refrigerators, let us remember not only cellars and salted meats, but also the ingenuity of water. Let us imagine ropes lowering jars into dark wells, women lifting them again at dusk with relief. Let us hear the murmur of springs trickling over jars, the steady rush of rivers cooling baskets tied to their banks. Let us picture clay pots sweating quietly in shaded courtyards, their contents safe within. These were the clever tricks that kept life steady, the small acts that turned water into a silent ally against heat and time. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine standing beside a clear spring. The air is cool, the sound of water soft and endless. Before you, jars sit in the shallow pool, their clay surfaces glistening, their contents safe. You lower your hand into the water, feel the chill run across your skin, and understand that this same coolness once carried entire families through summer's heat. You lift a jar, heavy and damp, and as you open it, the air fills with freshness, a promise preserved not by machines, but by the patience of earth and water. In the centuries before refrigeration, before even the concept of storing food in private cupboards for long months, entire communities leaned on one another. Survival was never just the concern of a single family. It was the concern of the whole village, the whole settlement, sometimes even the entire region. Out of this need for shared endurance grew communal granaries vast, carefully built structures where Grain, the foundation of every meal, could be stored safely in bulk. These places were more than barns or warehouses. They were vaults of survival, symbols of cooperation, and quiet monuments to patience. Within their walls lay the difference between hunger and security, between despair and hope. Imagine a village after harvest, its fields golden stubble, the heavy work of cutting, bundling, and carrying grain nearly finished. Families gather in the village square, ox-drawn carts creaking under loads of wheat or millet, sacks tied shut with rope. One by one they approach the great communal granary. It might be a tall structure raised on stone stilts to keep out dampness and rodents, or perhaps a long, low building with thick walls of clay and timber, or even a round tower with a single door at its base and a roof thatched tightly against rain. Each family unloads its share, pouring grain into the vast interior. The sound of kernels cascading into the granary is like heavy rain, steady and endless, filling the air with a dry, comforting scent. When the door is sealed, the harvest is no longer many small piles scattered in homes. It has become one great store, a fortress of nourishment guarded by all. These granaries were feats of ingenuity. Builders designed them to resist the enemies of stored food, dampness, insects, and rodents. Floors were raised off the ground with stone pillars or clay platforms, sometimes capped with flat discs of stone that rats could not climb. Wells were made thick, sometimes plastered smooth with mud, to leave no cracks where pests could creep. Ventilation holes were cut high above to let air flow gently, keeping the interior dry and cool. The doors were locked or sealed with heavy beams, not only for protection but also for fairness. No one could take more than their share without the community's knowledge. In many places, the responsibility of guarding the granary fell to an appointed keeper, a trusted elder or a small council, who ensured that the grain was rationed wisely and that every family received what was due. Life around the communal granary was shaped by trust. Each family brought part of its harvest, not only for its own future, but for the whole. In years of abundance, the granary swelled with grain, its interior dark and full, the air heavy with the scent of harvest. In years of scarcity, the granary became a lifeline, its doors opened carefully, its stores distributed according to need. No one wanted to imagine famine, but everyone prepared for it. The granary was insurance against the whims of weather, against droughts, floods, or sudden infestations that might destroy crops. Families took comfort in knowing that their collective effort was stronger than chance. The rituals surrounding these granaries were almost ceremonial. After the harvest, when carts rolled into the village square, children followed, skipping and laughing, tossing stray kernels into the air. Women dusted flour from their skirts as they tied sacks shut. Men lifted bundles high, carrying them up ladders or pouring them into chutes that funneled the grain inside. Elders stood by, nodding gravely, making notes or counting aloud, ensuring that each family contributed fairly. When the doors were finally sealed, there was relief in the air, a sense that the village had done its part to protect itself against the unknown. In the evenings, as fires burned and meals were shared, the talk often circled back to the granary, how much had been stored, how long it might last, whether it would see them safely through winter. The granary also became a place of gathering in subtle ways. Children played in its shadow, their games of hide and seek echoing around its stone pillars. Travelers stopped nearby, reassured that a village with a granary was a village that could endure, a place safe to rest. On certain days, the keeper might open the doors for inspection, and villagers would step inside the dim coolness, marveling at the mountain of grain, feeling pride at their shared wealth. In times of scarcity, the mood was different, quiet, tense, each family receiving its ration with solemn gratitude, aware of how close hunger stood outside the door. These structures carried weight beyond food. They were symbols of unity. To build and fill a granary was to declare that survival was not an individual struggle, but a collective one. Even those with smaller harvests contributed what they could, knowing they would be supported in return. The granary reminded everyone that no family was alone, that strength came not only from labor but from cooperation. It was both a physical and moral cornerstone of village life. Of course, not every community honored this balance perfectly. There were times when greed crept in, when keepers were accused of favoring one family over another, when disputes arose over how much should be shared. These conflicts could fracture trust, turning the granary from symbol of unity into symbol of strife. But in most places, necessity outweighed discord. Hunger left no room for pride. Even those who quarreled recognized that without the communal store, none would survive. The influence of communal granaries stretched across regions and centuries. In larger towns, they grew into state-run granaries, vast warehouses managed by officials who rationed food to soldiers, travelers, and the poor. In smaller villages, they remained humble, but their impact was no less important. Wherever they stood, they embodied the same truth, that food was power, and storing it wisely was the key to enduring time. Imagine standing before one of these granaries at dusk. The sun is low, casting long shadows across the village square. The building looms steady and solid, its walls thick, its door barred. Inside, silence reigns, but beneath that silence lies the heartbeat of the community, the grain, sleeping in darkness, waiting to be called upon when needed. Around you, villagers return to their homes, their bellies full for tonight, their minds eased by the knowledge that tomorrow, and the day after, and the long, cold months ahead have been guarded by this collective effort. The legacy of communal granaries lives on even now. Though machines and markets have replaced much of their necessity, the principle remains. Food banks, community pantries, and shared stores carry the same spirit, the same reminder that survival is often safest when shared. Just as in the past, the act of pooling resources binds people together, weaving unity from need. So when we think of life before refrigerators, let us not picture only cellars and jars within homes. Let us picture, too, the towering granary in the heart of a village, its walls filled with golden grain, its doors shut tight against hunger. Let us hear the sound of kernels cascading into its belly. Let us see the pride in the faces of those who contributed. Let us feel the comfort of knowing that the burden of survival was not carried alone. These were not just storage houses. They were monuments to patience, foresight, and the strength of many hearts beating as one dot as you let your thoughts drift tonight. Imagine yourself stepping into such a granary. The air is cool, the smell of grain rich and earthy, the dimness comforting. You trail your fingers across sacks stacked high, hear the faint rustle as kernels shift. Above you, beams creak softly, solid and enduring. You stand in the quiet, surrounded by enough food to carry your village through the hardest winter. And in that silence, you understand why these communal granaries were built, not only to store grain, but to store hope, to keep alive the promise of tomorrow when today was uncertain. When people of the past looked at their meals, they saw not only sustenance but fragility. Milk spoiled quickly, meat turned sour, bread grew stale, vegetables soft and rotted. To fight this constant struggle, they searched for anything that could stretch the life of their food. Beyond cellars, salt, smoke, and jars, there were settler A's, the leaves of herbs, the seeds of spices, the oils of plants. These were more than flavors. They were protectors, small and powerful, guarding meals against decay, carrying with them both necessity and comfort. Imagine a kitchen centuries ago, its air heavy with the earthy scent of drying herbs. Bundles of thyme, rosemary, mint, and sage hang from rafters, their stems crackling softly in the heat of the hearth. On the shelves rest jars of seeds, mustard, coriander, fennel. In baskets sit garlic bulbs and onions, their skins papery and dry. These are not decorations. They are tools as vital as knives or pots. Housewives and cooks reach for them daily, not only to season stews, but to keep food safe, to slow the invisible hand of spoilage. Garlic and onion were among the simplest yet most effective guardians. Their sharp juices resisted decay. Their strong scents drove away pests. Their flavors masked the beginnings of sourness in food that might otherwise have been wasted. Families rubbed garlic on meat before hanging it to dry, or mixed chopped onions into grain dishes to keep them fresh longer. In some villages, strings of garlic hung near storerooms, their presence both symbolic and practical. A single bulb, crushed and added to broth, could stretch the life of a meal and the strength of those who ate it. Herbs, too, were trusted protectors. Rosemary sprigs were tucked into jars of oil or wine, slowing their decline. Mint leaves were placed in milk, their oils delaying sourness for a day or two longer. A small difference, but in a world without refrigeration, even a day could mean everything. Thyme and sage-flavored stews, while their natural qualities quietly helped keep meat safe. Families learned these tricks not from books, but from generations of trial, watching, remembering, and passing on knowledge in soft voices around the hearth. Spices traveled further, their journey long and costly, yet their impact profound. Black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, each one carried not only flavor but power. When sprinkled on meat or mixed into sauces, they masked bitterness, softened sharpness, and turned ordinary meals into something extraordinary. More importantly, they extended the life of food, their oils and compounds resisting the quick hand of spoilage. Merchants carried them across deserts and seas, their weight worth more than silver, because they were not luxuries alone, but necessities disguised in aroma. A pinch of pepper in a stew could keep it edible longer. A dusting of cinnamon in a jar of fruit could preserve it through weeks of storage. Oils were another quiet ally. Pressed from olives, nuts, or seeds, oil sealed food away from air. A layer poured over vegetables in a jar or over cheese in a pot created a barrier that slowed decay. Families stored herbs submerged in oil, their flavors growing richer even as the oil protected them. Vinegar, too, became a protector, its sharp tang warding off rot. Pickled vegetables were safe, not only because of salt, but because vinegar created an environment where decay could not take hold. What seemed like taste alone was in truth survival, science practiced without the name. Communities learned to combine these methods. A jar of beans might be covered with oil and flavored with garlic, lasting weeks longer. Meat might be salted, smoked, and then rubbed with herbs, its safety layered upon safety. Grains might be stored with sprigs of mint or rosemary, their scents discouraging pests. These combinations were not random but honed through time, each family perfecting recipes of survival that carried through generations. The act of using herbs and spices for preservation shaped not only safety but culture. Entire cuisines grew around the flavors of necessity. What began as survival became taste, tradition, and identity. The tang of vinegar and dill and pickled cucumbers, the warmth of cinnamon and dried fruit, the sharp bite of garlic and sausages. These flavors were born of the need to endure, but became beloved in their own right. Even when refrigeration made them unnecessary, people continued the practices, unable to part from the tastes that carried memory. Markets reflected this importance. Stalls overflowed with bundles of herbs, their scents drifting through the air. Merchants shouted their qualities. Which leaf would keep milk longer? Which seed would protect bread? Which root would strengthen broth? Housewives chose carefully, their hands running over sprigs, their noses testing scents, their coins exchanged for what they knew would stretch their harvest further. The bustle of these markets was not just about flavor, but about survival. Each purchase a calculation of how to face the weeks ahead. Even travelers relied on herbs and spices. Soldiers carried dried herbs in pouches, sprinkling them into meals to mask the taste of food that had begun to spoil. Traders packed spiced wine, its sharpness guarding it from turning sour. Shepherds rubbed their cheeses with herbs, carrying them across hills without fear of ruin. Every step of travel was accompanied by these small guardians, invisible but constant. The memory of these practices endures. Even today, people preserve food with herbs, oil, and vinegar, not because they must, but because the taste has become inseparable from comfort. A jar of olives in oil, a bottle of vinegar pickles, a sausage flavored with garlic and pepper. These are echoes of the past, reminders of a time when flavor was more than pleasure, when it was protection, when it was survival itself. So when we think of life before refrigerators, let us not imagine only bland meals eaten in haste. Let us picture instead kitchens filled with the scent of rosemary and mint, storerooms lined with jars sealed in oil, baskets of onions and garlic piled high, their papery skins whispering as they are moved. Let us imagine markets alive with the fragrance of spices, their colors rich, their value unmatched, their presence not only luxuries but lifelines. Let us remember that the food people ate was guarded not only by walls of clay or blocks of ice, but also by the hidden strength of leaves, seeds, and oils. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine yourself lifting the lid of a jar filled with herbs and oil. The scent rises, sharp and comforting, carrying with it the promise of safety. Around you, a kitchen glows in firelight, its shelves lined with jars and baskets, its air alive with fragrance. You take a piece of preserved food, taste the mingling of garlic, rosemary, and vinegar, and understand that behind the flavor lies survival, that every bite is a story of patience and wisdom passed through centuries. When we think about our modern kitchens, humming quietly with refrigerators full of food, it is easy to take for granted the ease of preservation. A bottle of milk waits without fear of sourness, vegetables remain crisp for days, meat lies safely wrapped in the cold. But for most of human history, such comfort was unimaginable. Food was fragile, time was short, and every meal carried with it the question of how long it could last. Out of this constant uncertainty came not despair, but ingenuity. Families, villages, and entire civilizations learned to outwit decay. Their methods were simple yet profound, born not from wealth but from necessity, not from machines but from patience, observation, and shared memory. These echoes of ingenuity are the true story of life before refrigerators, a story not of helplessness but of resilience. Every household carried its own rhythm of preservation. Underground cellars were dug deep into the earth, their walls cool and damp, their air steady and calm. Jars lined with grain or beans, sacks of onions, barrels of salted meat. Each space became a small fortress against hunger. Families stepped down into their cellars daily, their footsteps echoing against packed earth, their hands brushing against clay walls, their baskets filled with food that would carry them through days when nothing fresh could be found. The cellar was more than storage. It was security, a quiet guardian beneath the home, reminding every family that survival could be held in the patience of stone and soil. Above ground, nature's tools worked tirelessly alongside people. Salt, coarse and heavy, was rubbed into meat and fish until it transformed hard but safe, its flavors sharp but enduring. Smoke curled from huts and chimneys, wrapping food in its slow embrace, drying and protecting it even as it enriched its taste. The sun itself played its role, spreading warmth across courtyards filled with fruit slices, coaxing sweetness into raisins, figs, and apples that would last long after orchards stood bare. These methods, though humble, turned fragile abundance into lasting nourishment. Each pinch of salt, each wisp of smoke, each ray of sun was a thread woven into the fabric of survival. Winter brought with it its own strange bounty, ice. Where lakes froze and rivers hardened, communities cut blocks of crystal-clear cold, hauling them to shore with ropes and sleds, storing them in houses of stone and straw. In the heat of summer, when fields shimmered and food risked spoiling in hours, these blocks were brought out again, their touch sharp, their presence miraculous. A sip of water cooled with winter ice, a piece of butter kept fresh in an ice house. These were not luxuries, but lifelines, bought with the bitter labor of men who cut and carried ice under frozen skies. Their work was harsh, their breath clouding in the air as saws bit into lakes, but their gift lasted long after the snow had melted. Clay, too, offered its wisdom. Shaped by hands, hardened by fire, jars became silent guardians of food. Their porous walls cooled water, their sealed mouths protected grain, their dark interiors kept milk, oil, and pickled vegetables safe from the world outside. A row of clay jars in a kitchen was not decoration, but survival itself. They were filled and sealed with care, marked with scratches or painted designs to tell one family's stores from another's. When a jar was opened, the sound of grain rushing out, the scent of vinegar rising, or the gleam of oil revealed not only food but foresight. Clay held the harvest steady, turning fragile days into months of security. Communities learned the art of transformation, turning spoilage into strength. Vegetables submerged in brine, pressed beneath stones, emerged weeks later sharp and tangy, alive with new flavor but safe to eat. Milk thickened into cheese, carrying its nourishment far longer than in liquid form. Bread hardened but was softened again with broth or stew, stretching its life beyond the day it was baked. Nothing was wasted. Everything was reconsidered. Food was not only preserved but reborn, its taste altered, its endurance lengthened, its story deepened. These acts were not simply about saving meals, but about learning to live with time itself, to bend it gently rather than fight it. Water played its quiet part as well. Wells, deep and dark, not only quenched thirst but cooled jars and baskets lowered into their depths. Springs gushed from stone, carrying with them chill that families harnessed to protect butter or milk. Rivers offered currents that wrapped food in constant coolness, baskets tied against their banks, their contents safe beneath the flowing water. Even clay pots soaked and left in breezy courtyards became small marvels of natural refrigeration, sweating their coolness into the air, keeping contents fresh. Everywhere people looked, they found nature's quiet hand willing to help, if only they learned how to use it. Sometimes preservation was not an individual act, but a collective one. Villages built communal granaries, their walls thick, their doors barred, their interiors filled with the harvest of many hands. Grain poured into these vaults with the sound of rain, piling high until the air was heavy with its scent. These stores did not belong to one family alone, but to all, guarded by trusted keepers, rationed carefully in times of need. In abundance, the granary was a monument to prosperity. In famine, it was salvation. These structures reminded everyone that survival was not solitary but shared, that the strength of a village was measured not only in its fields, but in its unity. Even the smallest details carried preservation. Herbs tucked into jars, garlic rubbed into meat, rosemary sprigs placed in oil. Each one held hidden power, protecting, flavoring, and stretching food's fragile life. Spices, carried across deserts and seas, were prized not only for their exotic taste, but for their quiet ability to fight decay. A pinch of pepper, a dusting of cinnamon, a handful of cloves could mean the difference between waste and sustenance. What began as necessity became culture, until entire cuisines bore the marks of survival hidden in flavor. All these methods carried with them not only safety but also memory. Children grew up watching their parents hang strips of meat in smokehouses, turning fruit in the sun, tying jars to ropes and lowering them into wells. They learned early that food did not last unless cared for, that survival was a daily practice, not a guarantee. These lessons became traditions, passed down quietly, woven into the rhythm of life. Even centuries later, when machines replaced the need, the practices endured as tastes, customs, and echoes of the past. Pickles on a table, dried fruit in a jar, cheese wrapped in herbs, all remind us that our ancestors' patience still lingers in our kitchens. So when we imagine life before refrigerators, let us not think of desperation or helplessness. Let us see instead ingenuity written in every detail. Families stepping into cool cellars, men sawing ice from frozen lakes, women laying fruit slices on sunlit mats, children tying jars into wells, elders sealing communal granaries with pride. Let us hear the sounds of grain cascading, of fire crackling in smokehouses, of water murmuring around baskets tied in streams. Let us feel the cool touch of clay, the sting of salt on fingers, the warmth of sun on drying fruit. These are the echoes of ingenuity, whispers of survival carried through time, proof that long before machines, people had already mastered the art of patience and care. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine yourself walking through a village before refrigerators existed. The air carries the scent of herbs, smoke, and fruit. You pass a cellar, its door open, cool air drifting upward. You see racks of drying apples in a courtyard, hear laughter as children chase birds away. You walk past a well, ropes creaking as jars are lowered into the depths. You step into the shadow of a granary, its walls filled with the hush of grain. Around you is life, busy and fragile, yet steady, clever, enduring. And you realize, in that quiet moment, that the hum of modern refrigerators is only the newest chapter in a much older story. A story written in patience, in community, and in the endless ingenuity of those who refuse to let food or hope go to waste. We have wandered together through the quiet ingenuity of the past, seeing how people, long before the hum of refrigerators, learned to tame time and preserve life. We stepped down into underground cellars, where the air was cool and steady, where jars of grain and baskets of onions rested in the earth's calm embrace. We watched salt rubbed into meat and fish until they hardened and endured. Smoke curling around strips hung patiently in huts, the sun coaxing sweetness into fruits that carried summer into winter. We saw men bent over frozen lakes, sawing ice block by block, capturing winter so that its coolness could soften the fiercest days of summer. We touched clay jars, rough but strong, sealed with oil or wax, their bellies heavy with grain. Milk or pickled vegetables, silent guardians lined neatly in corners. We tasted the tang of pickled cabbages and cucumbers, the sharpness of brine, the transformation of food through patience and time. We felt the sweetness of dried fruit on cold nights, the taste of orchards preserved in shriveled slices that still glowed with memory. We listened to the murmur of wells, the rush of springs, the steady coolness of water keeping jars safe, saw baskets tied in rivers, their contents swaying gently in the current. We stood before towering communal granaries, their doors sealed against hunger, their walls heavy with grain entrusted by many hands, symbols of unity and trust. We breathed in the fragrance of herbs and spices, small but powerful guardians that preserved as they flavored, carrying survival hidden in taste. And finally, we walked through the echoes of ingenuity itself, realizing that every act, every method, every trick was not born from luxury but from necessity, from the determination to endure. These were not inventions of kings or wealthy rulers. They were the work of ordinary families, of mothers and fathers, of children and elders, of communities bound together by the need to survive. Their genius was not loud or celebrated, but quiet, woven into daily rhythm passed from one generation to another. In every cellar door creaking open, in every rope lowering a jar into a well, in every hand turning fruit in the sun, there was knowledge, patience, and care. These small acts created continuity, carrying life forward through storms, droughts, winters, and summers. And though the machines of today have replaced the need, the spirit of that ingenuity remains in the traditions we still keep: the pickles on our tables, the herbs in our kitchens, the dried fruits we savor, The cheese aged carefully in cellars. The story of food before refrigerators is not a story of scarcity, but of resilience. It is a reminder that people have always found ways to adapt, to endure, to transform fragility into strength. It is a reminder that survival often lies in patience, in foresight, and community. And it is a reminder that even in silence, even in the smallest acts, there is wisdom carried through centuries. So as you prepare to rest tonight, carry with you the calm of this journey. Picture cellars cool and dark, smokehouses glowing faintly, orchards heavy with fruit laid out to dry, wells deep and quiet, granaries filled with the hush of grain. Hear the soft voices of families planning together, the laughter of children chasing birds from drying racks, the creak of sleds hauling ice across frozen lakes. Feel the patience of countless hands shaping jars, sprinkling salt, tying ropes, guarding food with love and endurance. Let these echoes remind you that history is not only grand monuments and battles, but also the quiet genius of ordinary life. And if you have found peace in these calm travels through forgotten time, remember to leave a like and subscribe so that the next story, waiting in silence, may find its way to you. Until then, rest well and let the whispers of ingenuity guide you gently into dreams.